In the first days of Donald Trump's return to El Casablanca, he just seemed to start confusion baiting with foreign policy. Two of the more iconic parts of his first days, plus 4 years, included changing the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. He also stated his desires to confiscate decent healthcare away from Greenland and Canada. These bold statements were obviously met with confusion and mockery, both inside the US and outside, and it was during this time that the New York Post, everyone's favorite satirical newspaper, ran a headline with black impact font reading the Donroe Doctrine. This headline and the imperialist push he had eventually faded out and stayed as just Trump's sixth grader acting tough phase for the next year. But despite what a lot of people feel, 1 year don't last forever, folks, and this headline would eventually become relevant again. Fast forward to almost exactly a year later, and it's a new year. Trump 2.0 is going pretty insane. That insanity is going in different trajectories depending on how far away from water and or how high the living space is of the person you're speaking to. But if you believe in polls, it's not so hot, for a variety of reasons. And somewhere in DC, Trump and company decided to give the left one more reason to go nuts into a Twitter echo chamber to ring in 2026, because, why not? Overnight on January 2nd and 3rd, explosions erupted in the Venezuelan capital of Caracas, and during the events, U.S. forces dropped in like Bowser and them and captured the Venezuelan president/dictator Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia Flores, bringing them back to my very hometown of New York City. Then in the afternoon, he and his presidential posse held a press conference in the most appropriate formal set. No, they did it at Mar-a-Lago. Anyway, in the press conference, Trump, as well as War/Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Dan Raising Kane, the highest ranking officer in the U.S. Armed Forces, officially announced what everyone already knew, but also made some statements that harked back to that whole Western Hemisphere domination arc that itself dominated his first few days, plus 4 years. In the press conference, Trump stated multiple motives for the overnight move, from supposed narco-terrorism operations, which Maduro and his wife were indicted for both back in 2020 and just hours after the capture, to oil, which was definitely not used as a motive for military action before, right? He even said in the press conference that not only was the U.S. going to run the country,
we're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country.
For-profit companies going into a Latin American country and using its natural resources to prop up the infrastructure. Never seen that before. Another notable statement in this PC would eventually be the term defining this whole situation, as he brought that New York Post headline back into the public memory.
All of these actions were in gross violation of the core principles of American foreign policy, dating back more than 2 centuries, and not anymore. All the way back, it dated to the Monroe Doctrines. And the Monroe Doctrine is a big deal, but we've superseded it by a lot, by a real lot. They now call it the Donroe Doctrine, I don't know.
He said the thing! And then he would follow it up by proclaiming,
"Forget about it anymore. Under our new national security strategy, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. Won't happen."
Okay, so what is the Monroe Doctrine he's talking about, you might be thinking? Great question, little boy, let me explain. Yep, it's time for a history lesson. The Monroe Doctrine is a historical stance on foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere that the U.S. has taken since at least the administration of the fifth president, James Monroe. Monroe first stated the doctrine out loud during his 1823 State of the Union address to Congress, basically saying to the traditional empires of Europe, "If you meddle in the affairs of our hemisphere, it will be considered an affront to the United States." This notably opposed the original stance of the country under George Washington, who's probably still been our wisest president to date. However, at the time, what would become the nations of Latin America were either still colonized, usually by Spain, or still trying to get their foot on, being independent nations. Add to that the fact that after the Napoleonic Wars, many European colonizers were interested in reinstating their rule over their American colonies. As a result, you can say that the US was simply looking out for the Creoles by telling Europe an attack on them is an attack on me, and that it made sense for the time. But for the first couple of decades of its existence, we really couldn't enforce it. You must remember that at the time, the US too was a widow baby country that wasn't yet a world superpower, and it showed. Most famously with the French attempt to make crepe enchiladas a thing. However, that changed at the turn of the century. By the time the 19th century was about to hang up its coat, the US had expanded west, had a civil war, and enriched itself during the Industrial Revolution. The US was now the dominant power that could defend the Americas, and they would prove it almost immediately when the USS Maine exploded and, thanks to some good old-fashioned yellow journalism, the US liberated Cuba, Guam, and the Philippines and Puerto Rico from Spain. They also helped Panama gain its independence from Colombia in exchange for having that sweet, sweet canal built. This certification of the Monroe Doctrine as a doctrine that could actually be enforced led to many different interpretations, called corollaries by formal people, of the doctrine that may or may not have influenced their future actions in the hemisphere. Why did I say may or may not? It absolutely did. Anyways, one of the most famous examples is the Roosevelt Corollary, named for President Theodore Roosevelt, who believed that the doctrine authorized the U.S. to intervene in Latin American companies that had been nasty, naughty children. Throughout the early 20th century, the doctrine pops up here and there, mostly during World War II when the US moved to protect the Americas from the Japanese from the west and the fascists from the east. But during the Cold War, well, you know what happened. The European threat the US now saw was not from fascists, but from communists. And the Red Scare US used the Monroe Doctrine as its plaything, with the CIA backing coups from Honduras to Chile. Contras selling coke and fighting commies, just the thing Reagan liked. They didn't just stay in Latin America with us, they went on a world tour with their commie bashing. This, of course, led to a lot of messed atrocities, although I would be remiss if I ignored the atrocities communist and socialist governments committed, not just in Latin America, but throughout the world. It was really a lose-lose scenario for these proxy nations. Messed up dictatorship under the eye of a foreign superpower, or messed up dictatorship under the eye of a foreign superpower. Your choice. But back to Latin America. All this would cause long-term scars to the ordinary people of Latin America, who witnessed regime change in the name of protection that they usually had no say in. That brings us to 2026 with the Trump corollary, or as we're calling it, of course, the Donroe Doctrine. Venezuela, as you might be aware, isn't the only place under Trump's radar. He's also renewed his interest in Greenland, which is 1. Obviously not freaking green. 2. Is strategically important due to its Arctic position in between North America and Northern Europe. And 3. Rich with both rare earth minerals and oil. Are we really even surprised at this point? So, the US has been pushing hard for it, but obviously Denmark, who quote unquote owns Greenland as a self autonomous territory, isn't budging. Kinda. As of recording this, the US, Denmark, Greenland, and the rest of NATO, the Mutual Defense Organization with the US, Canada, and most of Europe, are in presumably hashing out a deal, but us plebeians don't know anything at this point, as of recording this. As for the people of Greenland, they haven't really been happy about the possibility of El Nino Naranja just coming in and just taking over, especially right now, when the US is often seen as a downgrade from Europe or the rest of the First World. So there have been quite a lot of protests in not just Greenland, but all over a Trump skeptical Europe. But when have protests ever mattered to world leaders? Oh yeah. Alright, so you might be thinking what my takeaway on this whole saga is, since I've right now just been joking and guiding you through the swampy lagoon of US foreign policy. So, jokes aside, my honest journalistic takeaway through my research is that throughout his second administration, Donald Trump's Donroe Doctrine and his goal of American dominance over the Western Hemisphere, which is serious to the point that the State Department just straight up tweeted, "This is our hemisphere," has stark similarities with the imperialistic Monroe Doctrine interpretations of the past, which, as we've seen throughout the last 130 years, has led to a lot of death and hardship for the native people of these countries. And through all this, we have to wonder if James Monroe or any of the minds that formed this doctrine would have even approved of how the U.S. has used it, if we've misunderstood how they've seen it in their heads as a message for. But that's just my takeaway. And this video is just meant to be a funny little explainer on when the squiggly diggly is going on, and when the squiggly diggly happened to cause this. I hope you enjoyed this little explainer, and remember, the next time you deep fry your Oreos in Chevron Premium and fill your car with Crisco, remember all the delicious blood that went into getting that luxury. But Don't worry, Crisco's revolutionary filtration process keeps the blood from contaminating the oil.